My name is Amy Gutierrez. I work for the Nature Conservancy. Welcome to Ecobite. My name is Amy Gutierrez. I work for the Nature Conservancy. I am our Climate and Lands Coordinator, and I'm based here in Georgia. Before I joined the Nature Conservancy, I was a biologist, a field biologist by training, and also did consulting for a number of years before I came back to a nonprofit space, which I've really enjoyed. My role here at TNC has been focused on both climate and some of our stewardship activities, which is, I think, relevant to the discussion today because the poster you see behind me, the Georgia Low Impact Solar Siting Tool, or what we call the Georgia LISST, really came from that confluence of both, traditional land conservation as well as climate considerations. So for just a little bit of background on the tool, the way that the Nature Conservancy got involved originally had to do with the gopher tortoise. Gopher tortoise is the state reptile of Georgia, and it's also federally protected in a portion of its range. And it's one of the species that we spend a lot of time on because we do a lot of land management within their habitats across the state of Georgia. Our partners several years ago, I think this started in 2017, were alerting us to the fact that we were seeing some conflicts between these larger scale, utility scale solar siting facilities and gopher tortoises. They were needing to be relocated, their burrows were being impacted, things like that. And so we started working with partners in the space to develop some spatial tools, some resources for developers and for others in this space to try to get a feel for maybe better places to put these large solar facilities, as well as perhaps identify the places that are most likely to have some of these conflicts so that we could focus our efforts where it would make the most impact. Georgia is a large state, and it's a great place for solar. Depending on the year, we're in the top 10 of how much solar is being installed every year. It fluctuates a little bit, but it's a significant driver in our state, especially on these larger scale, utility scale solar installations. And that's a great thing for Georgia, and it's a great thing for the climate. We need to accelerate the transition to clean energy. We just don't want to do it in a way that harms the biodiversity and the kind of biodiversity crisis that we're also seeing at the same time. So the Nature Conservancy, TNC's position on this is that if we can site these large-scale solar places, then we can accelerate the transition to cleaner energy. So we're really looking for those win-win scenarios. We're looking for partners that we can work with and ways that we can move the needle on this. Speaking of partnerships, the tool started through a student collaboration with the NASA Develop program, which is a program that gives students real-world challenges and tries to solve them using spatial data, which again, this is a spatial tool, so it was a great fit. We had state agency partners, federal agency partners involved at the table early on. And then as the tool evolved, we pulled in other experts in the field, some nonprofits that had particular experience. We pulled in our utility partners to make sure we were representing what they were needing on their ends as well. The tool itself looks at sort of two different components of this challenge, of this potential for impacts in regards to solar. So we've got an environmental sensitivity portion of the tool, which looks at the pieces of our environment that are most likely to be impacted by the kind of development you see with solar. Every type of development has slightly different, considerations in terms of which species are likely to be impacted and how much land it needs and things like that. So we have an environmental sensitivity component that just looks at that. And then we have a separate solar suitability component, which looks at the physical land characteristics that the solar developers were telling us they were most looking for in solar sites. Because it's one thing to say, here are all the environmentally sensitive areas in Georgia, don't develop in those. But if none of those areas are good for the solar developers, if it doesn't give them the proximity to the transmission grid, or if it doesn't give them, the solar insulation and the appropriate slope that they need to actually develop the sites, then that it doesn't get us any further. So we wanted to put both of these together and try to identify the places that were good for the solar developers and also good for biodiversity. So places with low environmental sensitivity and high solar suitability are the places we're trying to key in on. And to be able to do that, we put all of this data together, and we have a color-coded system of kind of an overall ranking, what we call an overall preference ranking, trying to identify the places that would be preferred, most preferred for low impact solar. So solar that is developed in a way that is not in conflict with biodiversity. So we have ranking system to sort of give folks an idea of the variation within the landscape of what places might be suitable for this kind of low impact utility scale solar. So we've got a green, blue, yellow, red indication within the state, and you can actually see it. The preference ranking is really to make sure that as decision makers, as solar developers, as local decision makers are trying to decide what kind of solar projects to move forward with, they can look at multiple locations and perhaps choose the one that is least impactful earlier on in the process. One of the challenges with this whole situation is that we do not have statewide environmental solar permitting here in Georgia. So a lot of the environmental considerations end up being dealt with either in the agreements that a developer has with the utility who will be purchasing the power, or in the local regulations, or in stormwater and erosion and sediment permitting. Those are kind of the three big categories. Our natural resource agencies don't get pulled in unless there's a concern. Part of our tool is trying to be a little more proactive in this process. So trying to identify on the front end better places for solar so that the solar developers, don't have to get into the issues further on down the line when they've already, invested multiple years and, significant amount of money in a site just to find out that they're going to have to relocate a lot of gopher tortoises, for example, or they're going to have to, come up with a habitat conservation plan with the Fish and Wildlife Service, which is, these things are happening regularly in Georgia. And as we continue to expand on our solar installations, it's becoming even more of a thing. So we hope that this tool can help the developers make these decisions in a way that is beneficial for the environment, but also beneficial for them in meeting their goals and meeting their renewable energy goals and meeting, their timelines and their budgets and things like that. So, we're just really looking for the places that are the best middle ground for all parties to get us where we need to go. This tool was originally published in 2019, and then we did a data revision in 2021. Since then, the solar landscape has really changed in Georgia. The acceleration that we're seeing on these large-scale solar sites has, just continued to increase exponentially. So compared to the beginning, we're in so many more conversations with partners and folks trying to work on these issues, and we're just really excited and really proud that we already have a tool and a methodology sort of established to look at this intersection. And we are seeing some good progress on it being taken up in other areas, which is fantastic because this is not just an issue in Georgia. This is an issue across the country. The Nature Conservancy has a lot of work in the Midwest focused on similar kinds of conflicts. Here in the Southeast, we're really focused on this consideration of solar. South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, which has a solar habitat certification and is also looking at these solar issues, took our methodology, refined it for the considerations they needed for South Carolina, and have recently published a similar tool. So the South Carolina tool is using the same kind of concept, but really making it specific to their area. And we think that that's, this kind of regional approach while still staying state focused is going to be the way for right now that we move this thing forward. I'm in a number of conversations with, regional partners from Fish and Wildlife Service, from the Department of Defense, from, the other state agencies that are really just trying to figure out the best way to move forward on this. So far, this has been really exciting. We've had folks reach out to us and ask us about it because they're looking at investing in solar. We've had, solar developers reach out. We've had contractors who might be working with a solar developer reach out. We've got some exciting partnerships coming down the line with working on some best management practice guidance for Georgia, and a lot of that, especially on the siting side of this, so where the sites actually get located, one of the big things that we're able to put out there to provide a resource for developers is to look at the tool and, either be prepared for additional challenges if you're siting in a place that's less preferred for low impact solar, or be able to identify at the front end that you've already proactively selected a less impactful area, and that just helps the process move around a little bit a little quicker. We've also connected with local cities, municipalities, things like that are really on the front lines of these challenges, trying to decide what kind of ordinances they might want to write and what kind of approvals they can provide, what kind of permitting they might want to require from a zoning perspective. And we can provide them a tool like this that is publicly available, simplified in case they don't have GIS expertise in-house. They can still use this, interpret this, and incorporate it into their planning processes. We're seeing the conflicts that we see in Georgia, either because of local opposition or because of species impacts or land conversion, farmland conversion. Some of these big hot button issues are resulting in some local jurisdictions actually putting in moratoria on solar development until they can, figure out some sort of schematic that they can do it in a more sustainable way. So we are hopeful that tools like this can kind of prevent that slow down that these moratoria cause, so that we can continue to move toward accelerating and meeting our clean energy needs. Because if we slow this up, biodiversity is going to be impacted one way or another. So we're trying to make sure that we can go smart to go fast.
Continue this conversation with the Ecobite podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.